Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. The dark web led me to a hidden alien base in the middle of nowhere. The beings inside are awake. Alright, so let me start this by saying, yeah, I was one of those guys. You know, the ones who get bored at 3 a.m. and make the worst possible decisions. I've always been into weird stuff. Conspiracy theories, obscure forums, urban legends. If it's creepy, I'm down for it. That's probably why the deep web always intrigued me. But trust me, it's not like in the movies where you log on and instantly see a hitman for hire or a live stream of something horrific. It's mostly dead ends and shady looking forums selling overpriced junk. But this one night, I found something different. Something that still makes my skin crawl just thinking about it. So, I was on my usual late night spree, just clicking around, mostly bored. I'd been on the deep web a few times before, but I never really came across anything too crazy. Just the usual cryptic forums and sketchy sites selling stolen accounts or whatever. But this time, I stumbled across a link on some back alley forum thread. It was one of those threads where people shared random links, claiming they led to all kinds of weird stuff. Most were just dead links, or stuff that redirected you to ads. But then I clicked on one that just said Xanadu. That's it. No description, no context. Just Xanadu. Curiosity got the better of me, as usual, and I clicked on it. I wish I could say it took me to a cool site or a creepy video or something, but no. At first, it was just a blank page, except for a tiny blinking cursor in the top left corner, like something out of an old DOS interface. Before I could exit out, a single line of text appeared on the screen. Are you ready to see what the world hides? I laughed a little. It felt like one of those cheesy deep web myths, or some hacker wannabe trying to look cool. But then it hit me. The page didn't have a text box or anything, so how could it know I was still there, reading? I didn't type anything. It just showed up. Another line appeared. The truth is closer than you think. Now I was intrigued. I sat there for a minute, trying to decide whether this was just someone messing with me or if there was something else going on. My gut told me to back out, but you know how it is when you've gone down the rabbit hole. You can't just stop. So I waited, and then it gave me another prompt. The key is in your location. Then my cursor moved on its own, clicking into my address bar and opening up my map. I froze. It zoomed into my exact location, not just the city or even the block, but my house. I immediately pulled the plug on my router, sat there in the dark, heart pounding, feeling stupid for letting things get so far. But here's the weird thing. Nothing happened after that. No hackers, no creepy messages, just silence. For the next few days, everything went back to normal. I started to think maybe it was just some elaborate prank. But then, 3 days later, an email popped up in my inbox. No subject, no sender, just an email with a single link inside. The email only had 2 words, come closer. And that's when I knew I'd made a huge mistake. Looking back, I should have just deleted the email and moved on with my life. But I didn't. That's the thing about curiosity. It hooks you. Deep down, I wanted to know what it all meant, what was behind that link. I mean, I figured it could be some hacker or scam, but part of me wanted to believe it was something more. Something that would explain the weirdness from before. So, Like an idiot, I clicked the link. It took me to a new page, just like the last one. Blank, except for a series of coordinates. Nothing else. No message this time, just a string of numbers. I copied them and plugged them into Google Maps, and that's where things got really messed up. The coordinates led to a place in the middle of nowhere. Literally, some spot out in the desert, a few hours away from any major city. No buildings, no roads, just an empty, barren stretch of land. The satellite view showed nothing but rocks and sand for miles. But here's the thing. The more I zoomed in, the more it looked wrong. The desert around the area had this weird distortion, like the images had been stretched or blurred in a way that didn't look natural, almost like someone or something had been trying to cover it up. And that's when I decided to go there. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Why the hell would you drive out into the middle of nowhere for something so sketchy? The answer is simple. Because I'm an idiot. But honestly, by this point, I was too far in. The whole thing was eating at me, and I had to know what was out there. I had a buddy, Jake, who's always down for anything reckless, so I called him up. I figured if I was going to check out a possible government cover-up in the desert, I might as well drag someone else into my terrible decision. Jake was all in the second I told him about the deep web stuff. He didn't even hesitate. We packed up some snacks, threw a couple of flashlights in the car, and set off around midnight. Typical dumb move, right? Heading out into the desert in the dead of night for some mystery coordinates. The drive out was actually kind of fun at first. We were joking around, blasting music, talking about how this was either going to end with us discovering some hidden treasure or getting murdered by aliens. But the further we drove, the quieter it got. The roads got narrower, the lights from the town behind us disappeared, and soon we were driving through complete darkness. The only thing lighting up the road ahead was our headlights. No cell service, no GPS, just miles of desert. We finally reached the end of the paved road, and from there, it was all dirt trails. Our GPS had already crapped out, so we were relying on the compass in Jake's truck. The coordinates led us down this narrow, rocky path that seemed to stretch on forever. It was almost like the desert itself was pulling us deeper into the emptiness. And that's when we saw the first sign. We were deep in the desert, way off the beaten path, when something strange happened. We'd been driving in total silence for a while, both of us too spooked to talk. The road was bumpy, and the darkness felt almost alive out there. Every once in a while, I'd glance out the window and swear I saw something moving, but whenever I looked straight at it, it was gone. Just shadows, I kept telling myself. Nothing more. Then, in the distance, our headlights caught something reflecting back. At first, I thought it was just a road sign or maybe an abandoned car, but as we got closer, I realized it was neither of those things. It was a metal gate, out in the middle of nowhere. This gate wasn't some rusted old piece of junk either. It looked new, like something you'd see outside of a military base. Thick steel bars with no obvious way to open it. No lock, no chain, just a solid wall of metal blocking the path. Jake slowed the truck down to a crawl, and we stopped just a few feet away from it. We sat there for a minute, staring at the gate, both of us unsure of what to do next. The coordinates we had plugged in were still a couple of miles past this point, but the road was completely cut off. "Man, this is military or something," Jake muttered, tapping the steering wheel nervously. "We probably shouldn't be here." He was right, and I knew it. But something about the gate, about the fact that it was so out of place, made me want to keep going. There was no sign of a guardhouse, no cameras, nothing, just the gate. I hopped out of the truck, flashlight in hand, and walked closer to it. That's when I noticed the symbol. Etched into one of the bars, almost too small to see, was a strange emblem. It wasn't military. I'd never seen anything like it before. It was a circle with what looked like 3 lines crossing through it at weird angles, almost like a star, but distorted, like someone had twisted it. The lines were too perfect, too sharp, like they had been cut into the metal with a precision tool. I felt a weird sense of dread creep over me as I stared at it. I reached out to touch the engraving, and the second my hand made contact with the cold steel, I heard a noise. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was so quiet, I almost thought I imagined it. A low hum, like an engine starting up far away. Jake must have heard it too, because he jumped out of the truck, his flashlight darting around wildly. "You hear that?" he asked, his voice tight. Before I could respond, the gate opened, not like someone was pulling it back or anything. It slid sideways, soundlessly, like it was on some kind of motor, but there was no one there. No mechanism, no visible way for it to move. It just opened. Now, any sane person would have turned back right then and there. But we weren't exactly thinking straight. When you're in a moment like that, when something so weird happens, something you know can't be real, it's like your brain doesn't know how to process it. So instead of running, I walked through the gate. Jake was right behind me, even though I could tell he was freaking out, just as much as I was. I don't think either of us said a word as we made our way further down the dirt path. It wasn't long before we saw it. In the distance, partially hidden behind a ridge of rocks, was a building. It was squat, mostly concrete, and way bigger than I expected. There were no windows, just a few small vents on the sides, and a single metal door at the front. It looked more like a bunker than a building. "What the hell is this place?" Jake whispered. I didn't have an answer. We stood there, staring at the building, trying to make sense of what we were looking at. There were no lights, no vehicles, just the building, sitting there, dead silent, in the middle of the desert. I wanted to leave. Every instinct in my body was telling me to turn around and get out of there. But then I saw the door, slightly open, and that curiosity, that urge to figure out what the hell this place was, it kicked back in, stronger than ever. I couldn't stop myself from walking toward it. I felt like I was being pulled. Jake was muttering behind me, something about how this was a bad idea, how we shouldn't be messing around with this. But he still followed. We couldn't just turn back. Not now. Not after everything. I reached the door first. It was heavy, rusted around the edges, but not enough to keep it sealed shut. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was thick, stale, like the place had been sealed off for years. There was barely any light, just a faint glow coming from further down the hallway. The walls were concrete, like some kind of underground bunker, but the deeper we went, the stranger it felt. Jake and I didn't talk as we moved further in. We were both on edge, the sound of our footsteps echoing unnaturally in the narrow hallway. The glow ahead was getting stronger, but it had this weird, greenish tint to it, almost like the light you'd see in a hospital, but sickly, like it wasn't meant for human eyes. The corridor suddenly opened into a much larger room, and that's when we saw it. At the center of the room, illuminated by the sickly green light, was a large, cylindrical object. It was metallic, covered in what looked like wires and tubes. But the weirdest part, the surface of it was covered in the same symbol we saw on the gate outside. That twisted star shape, repeated over and over, etched deep into the metal like scars. And then we heard it, that low hum from before, only louder this time, more insistent. And with it came a new sound, something like hissing, or maybe breathing. That's when Jake finally lost it. "We need to go. Now." I nodded, taking a step back toward the door. But as I turned, something stopped me cold. In the far corner of the room, just barely visible in the dim light, something moved. It was subtle, almost like a trick of the light, but then it shifted again. Something tall, standing in the shadows, watching us. I couldn't make out its shape, but I could feel its eyes on me, burning through the darkness, fixed on us like we'd woken it up. Jake grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door, and we ran. Neither of us looked back. We sprinted down the hallway, back out through the gate, and into the truck. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me 3 tries to get the keys into the ignition. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind us, something that had been waiting in that base, something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. And now, it was awake. We tore out of there so fast, the truck's tires kicked up, a cloud of dust that hung in the air like a fog. Jake floored the gas, and I just sat there, gripping the edge of my seat, heart pounding in my throat. Neither of us spoke for a solid minute. The only sound was the roar of the engine as we sped back down the dirt trail, bouncing over every rock and rut in the path. I kept looking back through the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something, someone, following us. But there was nothing, just the empty desert stretching out behind us. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling we weren't alone, like something was watching us, not from behind, but from above, from every angle. The air felt heavy, almost electric, like the pressure before a storm. My skin prickled with unease. "Did you see that thing?" Jake finally broke the silence, his voice shaking. He was gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. "I don't know what the hell I saw," I muttered, my eyes still scanning the darkness outside, looking for any sign of movement. That thing in the corner, I swear it was moving. And the sound, man, that hissing. "Just drive." I cut him off, not because I didn't want to hear it, but because I knew if we kept talking about it, it'd make it real. Too real. My brain was still in denial mode, trying to process what we'd just seen, or maybe what we hadn't seen, because whatever was in that room, it wasn't human. It didn't feel human. But here's the thing. As much as I wanted to believe it was over, that we were speeding away from whatever that was back there, I couldn't shake the creeping sensation that we'd woken something up, something that wasn't going to let us just drive away. About 15 minutes into our frantic escape, Jake slammed on the brakes so hard I nearly flew through the windshield. We skidded to a stop in the middle of the dirt road, the truck swerving dangerously before finally settling. "Why the hell did you stop?" I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. I was on edge, and the sudden stop had my heart racing all over again. "Look," Jake whispered, pointing out through the windshield. I followed his gaze, squinting into the dark. At first, I didn't see anything, just the same barren desert we'd been driving through for miles. But then I saw it, a faint light in the distance. It wasn't the kind of light you'd expect out here. It wasn't the glow of a town or headlights from another car. No, this was different. It was this pale, almost bluish light, flickering softly, like it was coming from the ground itself. And it was moving, not fast, but slowly, shifting from one spot to another, almost like it was searching for something. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. That wasn't there before. It couldn't have been. Jake stared at it, eyes wide. What is that? I didn't have an answer. I just shook my head, swallowing hard. My mouth had gone dry, and every instinct in my body was screaming at me to tell Jake to hit the gas and not look back. But I couldn't take my eyes off the light. There was something unnatural about it, something that made my stomach churn. "It's coming this way," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. He was right. The light was moving closer, slowly but steadily, and as it did, I could hear that sound again, the low hum, the same one from the base. But now it wasn't distant. It was loud, vibrating in the air around us, like it was seeping through the ground, through the truck itself. The kind of sound that gets inside your head and makes it hard to think. "Drive," I muttered. Then louder. "Drive." But Jake wasn't moving. He just sat there, staring at the light like he was hypnotized. It wasn't until I shook him that he snapped out of it, blinked a few times, and hit the gas. The truck lurched forward, the tires spinning in the dirt before catching and propelling us forward. But the light didn't stop. It kept following us, picking up speed now, its glow growing brighter as it closed the distance. "Faster!" I yelled, but Jake was already pushing the truck to its limits. The speedometer needle crept higher and higher, but no matter how fast we went, the light kept pace with us. I looked out the side window and saw it hovering beside us now, almost like it was keeping pace, studying us. And then the truck died. No warning, no sputtering, just dead. The dashboard lights flickered once and went dark. The engine cut off. We coasted for a few more seconds before coming to a stop. Silence. Just the sound of our breathing, ragged and terrified. Jake frantically turned the key, trying to restart the engine, but it was no use. Nothing. Not even a click. The truck was completely dead. "What the hell is happening?" Jake's voice cracked, and I could see the panic in his eyes. I didn't have an answer. All I could think about was that light and how it was still there, hovering just a few feet from the truck now, close enough that I could make out the strange, pulsating glow. It wasn't just light. There was something inside it, something moving, shifting, and that's when I saw the figure. At first, it was just a shape, vague, humanoid, but distorted, like it was flickering in and out of existence. But as it got closer, the figure became clearer. It was tall, impossibly tall, with elongated limbs that didn't seem to move the way they should. Its face, or what I thought was its face, was featureless, just smooth and blank, like a mannequin made of light. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All I could do was stare as it approached the truck. It stopped just outside Jake's window, its glowing face inches from the glass. Jake was frozen, his hands still gripping the wheel, knuckles white. Then the figure lifted one of its long, thin arms and placed it against the window. The glass didn't crack or shatter. It just melted beneath its touch, like ice in the sun. The edges of the window warped, curling inward as the figure pushed its arm through. I finally snapped out of it. "Get out!" I screamed, throwing open my door and stumbling out into the dirt. Jake followed a second later, both of us sprinting away from the truck without looking back. The desert was pitch black, and the only light was the pale glow of the thing behind us. I could hear it. No, I could feel it, getting closer. That same hum vibrating through the air, making my teeth chatter. We kept running, but it didn't matter. The desert stretched out endlessly, and there was nowhere to go. No cover, no buildings, nothing. My legs were burning, lungs on fire, but I didn't stop. I couldn't, not with that thing behind us. I glanced back once, just in time to see it standing beside the truck. It wasn't chasing us. It didn't need to, because that's when the light multiplied. 1 became 2, then 3, then a dozen, each one flickering, glowing, and moving with that same unnatural motion. They were all around us now, surrounding us, closing in, and that's when I realized, whatever we'd stumbled into, whatever that base was, this was only the beginning. I don't think I've ever felt so small as I did right then, standing in the middle of the desert, surrounded by those lights. They were everywhere now, closing in from every direction. Each one of them moved in that same eerie, unnatural way, gliding over the ground like they weren't even touching it. And those figures, the tall, blank-faced beings inside the light, they weren't just watching us anymore. They were hunting us. Jake and I kept running, but it was like running in a nightmare. No matter how fast we moved, the lights seemed to grow closer, swallowing up the darkness, cutting off any chance of escape. My legs were screaming in protest, lungs burning, but I didn't dare stop. I knew if we stopped, it was over. "What do we do?" Jake's voice was ragged, barely more than a gasp as we sprinted side by side, our boots kicking up the dry desert dust. I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I didn't think there was anything we could do. My mind raced, trying to piece together some kind of explanation for what was happening, but nothing made sense. These things weren't human. They weren't from here. And wherever they'd come from, we had just crossed into their territory. As if on cue, the humming sound intensified. That low, thrumming vibration filled the air again, but this time it was louder, more intense, like it was coming from inside my skull. It was impossible to think, to focus on anything other than that sound. I glanced at Jake, and I could see him struggling too, his eyes wide with panic, his movements slowing as the hum seemed to sap the strength out of him. "Over there!" Jake suddenly pointed to the left, and for a second, I didn't see what he was pointing at. But then, through the haze of panic, I saw it. A cluster of boulders, half hidden by a small ridge in the distance. It wasn't much, but it was the only cover we had, the only thing between us and whatever those lights were. We veered toward it, pushing ourselves harder, trying to outrun the lights that seemed to be closing in faster now. I could feel them at my back, like they were reaching out, their glowing limbs just inches away. The hum was almost deafening now, reverberating through my bones. Jake reached the boulders first, scrambling up the rocky incline with a speed that could only come from sheer desperation. I was right behind him, my hand slipping on the rough stone as I hauled myself up and ducked down behind the largest rock. We pressed ourselves against it, panting, trying to catch our breath as the lights closed in around us. For a moment, I thought we'd made it. The lights stopped just short of the rocks, hovering there like they were waiting. But for what? I didn't know. Jake looked at me, his face pale, drenched in sweat. "What the hell are those things?" he whispered, like saying it any louder would bring them closer. "I don't know," I managed, my voice shaky. "But we can't stay here." The lights didn't move. They stayed where they were, just beyond the boulders, flickering softly in the dark. It was almost like they were waiting for us to make the next move, and that made me uneasy. Why weren't they attacking? What were they waiting for? Then, as I peered over the edge of the rock, I noticed something strange. The figures inside the lights. They weren't moving like before. They were all standing still now, their featureless faces pointed in the same direction, towards something further up the ridge. "Do you see that?" I asked, nudging Jake. He looked where I was pointing and frowned. "What the—" At the top of the ridge, barely visible against the night sky, was a structure. It looked like a tower, or maybe a satellite dish, something metallic, rising out of the desert, like it had been buried there for years. The lights were all focused on it now, like it was the source of whatever was controlling them. Without thinking, I motioned to Jake. "We need to check that out." Jake stared at me like I was insane, and honestly, I don't blame him. But what choice did we have? We couldn't stay hidden behind these rocks forever, and if there was a chance, any chance, that this thing was the key to stopping whatever was happening, we had to take it. Reluctantly, Jake nodded. "Fine, but if we die doing this, I'm haunting your ass." We waited until the lights flickered again, like they were distracted, then bolted from the rocks, staying as low as we could. The climb up the ridge was steep, and the whole time I kept expecting one of the lights to notice us and give chase. But they didn't. They stayed focused on the tower. As we neared the top of the ridge, the tower came into full view. It was taller than I thought, at least 50 feet high, and it looked old, like it had been out here for decades. The base of it was covered in sand, partially buried by time. But what really caught my attention was the panel at the base, an access door, rusted and half open, leading down into the ground. I stopped, staring at the door. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Jake didn't answer. He just walked over to the door and pulled it open the rest of the way, revealing a dark staircase leading down into the earth. The hum was louder now, almost unbearable, like the source of it was just below us. I hesitated for a second, my gut screaming at me not to go down there, but we didn't have a choice. If this tower was controlling those lights, those things, then whatever was down there had to be the key to shutting it all down. Without another word, we descended into the darkness. The stairs were narrow, and the deeper we went, the colder it got. The air was thick with the smell of damp metal and something else, something rotten. It was pitch black, except for the faint green glow coming from deeper inside the structure. That same sickly light we'd seen back at the base. When we reached the bottom, the staircase opened up into a small circular room, and in the center of that room was a control panel. It was ancient, covered in dust and grime, but the screens were still active, displaying strange, alien symbols that shifted and changed before our eyes. The same symbols from the gate and the metal object back at the base. "What the hell is this?" Jake whispered, running his fingers over the panel, brushing off the dust. He leaned in closer, squinting at the symbols. "Do you think this controls the lights? The things?" I didn't answer. I was too focused on something else. The hum, it was coming from here, from beneath the control panel. I crouched down, brushing aside more dust, and found what looked like a hatch. I hesitated, then opened it. Beneath the hatch was a pulsating, organic mass, something alive, breathing, radiating that same greenish glow. It was embedded into the floor, wrapped in wires and cables, like it was part of the machine. But it was alive. Before I could say anything, the lights in the room flickered, and the hum grew louder, almost deafening now. The walls around us started to vibrate, and I realized, too late, what was happening. The lights outside weren't just waiting for us. They were connected to this thing, and now we had triggered something far worse. The whole room trembled like it was alive. That low, throbbing hum grew into something monstrous, a sound so deep and primal it rattled my bones. I could feel it in my chest, vibrating through my skull, and it was coming from the pulsating mass beneath the hatch. That thing wrapped in wires and cables. The light from it pulsed in time with the hum, growing brighter with every second. Jake backed away from the panel, his face pale. "Man, we need to go. We need to go right now." But I couldn't move. My eyes were glued to that thing, that living mass. It was alive, and it was waking up. The glow from it seemed to pulse faster, and I could hear, no, feel, something stirring beneath the ground. It was like this thing was connected to everything. The lights outside, the beings, the base, all of it was part of some larger, hidden mechanism that we had just accidentally triggered. I snapped out of my trance as the entire room seemed to shift. The walls creaked, and a deep, resonant groan echoed from somewhere far below us. Jake was already at the stairs, frantically looking up, but even in the pitch black, I could tell the way out was cut off. The metal door we'd come through at the top of the staircase had sealed shut. Panic surged through me as I ran to the bottom of the stairs and tried to pull the door open, but it wouldn't budge. The air inside the room had grown stifling, thick with the scent of burning metal and something far worse, something organic, like decaying flesh. I glanced back at Jake, whose eyes were wide with fear, and in that moment, I knew we were trapped. "We need to shut it off," Jake shouted, his voice cracking. I looked back at the control panel. It was the only thing in the room that seemed like it had any chance of stopping whatever was happening. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the alien symbols flickering across the screen. They were shifting so quickly, I could barely focus on them. But one thing was clear. They weren't random. It was a sequence, a code. And if I could figure it out... The lights in the room flickered again, casting eerie shadows across the walls, and that sickening green glow grew even brighter, like the thing beneath the floor was feeding off the energy. The hum had become a deafening roar now, and with it came another sound, a low, guttural growl, like something was crawling up from deep within the earth. Whatever we'd awoken, it was coming. I ran to the control panel and started pressing buttons, my hands shaking, desperately trying to stop the sequence. The symbols blurred together, incomprehensible, and every wrong move seemed to make the situation worse. The lights outside the structure began to flash faster, and through the narrow slit in the door, I could see the figures, the beings, surrounding the tower now, their glowing forms flickering with a new intensity. Then something shifted in the air. The temperature dropped, and I felt it. A presence. Not just the lights or the hum, but something else, something bigger, something ancient. I don't know how I knew, but it was like the thing beneath the floor was no longer just a machine. It was something alive, something that had been sleeping for a very long time, and we had just woken it up. "We're out of time," Jake screamed, yanking me away from the control panel. "We have to find another way out," I wanted to argue, but he was right. The control panel wasn't going to help us now. Whatever we'd started couldn't be stopped. The ground beneath us was shaking so violently, I thought the entire structure was going to collapse. The hatch in the floor began to crack open wider. The cables and wires started to twitch like they were alive, slithering across the floor, and that mass, whatever it was, began to rise. It was like the earth itself was splitting apart to let it free. Jake grabbed me by the arm, pulling me toward the far wall. There's got to be another exit, a maintenance tunnel, something. We stumbled through the room, frantically searching for any kind of escape. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst, and the roar of whatever was coming from below was almost unbearable now. It was like standing next to a jet engine, the sound so powerful, it felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. And then, just when I thought we were out of options, Jake found it. Hidden behind a rusted metal grate, barely visible in the dim light, was a small crawl space, just big enough for us to squeeze through. Without hesitating, Jake kicked the grate loose, and we scrambled inside. It was tight, claustrophobic, and pitch black. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of something long dead, but it was our only chance. As we crawled through the tunnel, I could feel the vibrations growing stronger. The thing beneath the base, whatever it was coming for us, and it wasn't going to stop. The walls of the tunnel groaned and shifted, dust raining down from above. Every second felt like the whole place was going to cave in on us. "Keep going," I urged Jake, my voice shaking as we crawled as fast as we could. My hands were scraped raw from the jagged metal, but I didn't care. We had to get out. We had to. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed from behind us. I whipped my head around just in time to see the tunnel collapsing, and in the dim light, I caught a glimpse of it. A massive, glowing shape, twisting and writhing through the dark, its limbs impossibly long, its face, or what passed for one, blank and featureless. But I could feel its gaze burning into my soul. It wasn't just some alien entity. This thing was older, far older than anything I could comprehend, and it had been waiting. It let out a shriek, so loud and piercing that I had to cover my ears. The walls around us shuddered, and I could feel the temperature drop even further. The thing was too big, too powerful for this space. It was trapped, and it was angry. Jake and I pushed forward, the tunnel finally opening up into another room, some kind of maintenance area filled with old equipment and debris. There was another door at the far end, and we raced for it, throwing it open and stumbling outside into the cold desert air. The night sky above us was alive with the glow of those lights, flickering wildly now, like a storm of energy swirling around the tower. The ground beneath our feet rumbled, and from somewhere deep below, I heard a final bone-chilling roar. The entire structure behind us shuddered, and the lights began to blink out, one by one. We ran. We didn't stop. We didn't look back. The desert stretched out in front of us, endless and dark, but we didn't care. All we knew was that we had to get as far away from that place as possible. Whatever we'd uncovered, whatever we'd unleashed, wasn't meant to be disturbed. And even though the lights had vanished, even though the hum had stopped, I could still feel it. That presence, that thing watching us, waiting. We never spoke about it again. We made it back to Jake's truck, miraculously still where we left it, and drove in silence until the sun started to rise. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone and the world is quiet, I hear it again. That hum, that deep reverberating sound that feels like it's coming from beneath the ground. And every time, I wonder if those beings, that base, if it's still out there, or worse, if it's coming back. I was offered a dark web job to observe an alien. Now it's trying to communicate with me. Hey Reddit, I've been sitting on this story for a while now, trying to figure out if I should share it or not. But I think I need to get it off my chest, if only to see if anyone has had a similar experience or just to make sense of what happened to me. So, buckle up. This gets weird real fast. For a little background, I'm what you'd call a deep web enthusiast. No, I'm not one of those creepy hackers or criminals you hear about. I just like poking around in the darker corners of the internet. Sometimes you find cool underground communities, weird conspiracy forums, or even rare books and movies you can't find anywhere else. But trust me, I always stayed clear of anything super illegal. I'm not about that life. One night, I was up late, like usual, scrolling through some forums I frequent. I came across this thread titled something like "Easy Job for Good Money. Just watch." The post was vague, but intriguing. It said something about a new opportunity for those who don't mind silent observation. It didn't say what I'd be observing, but the pay was insane. $5,000 for 1 week of work, with a promise of more if I kept going. I know, red flags, but I was broke, and I figured it would just be some kind of boring surveillance gig. Maybe I'd be watching some security cameras for a rich paranoid guy or something. So, against my better judgment, I clicked on the link. It took me to a strange, minimalist site with nothing but a contact form and a tagline: "Curiosity pays." After thinking it over for about 2 minutes, I filled it out. Name, I used a fake one. Email, a burner I had, and then a brief summary of why I thought I'd be good for the job. I wrote something generic about being observant and reliable. After hitting submit, I figured I wouldn't hear back. You know how these things go. But I did hear back. Within an hour, I got an email from someone with a user handle I couldn't pronounce, something like G2XR94, and the message was straight to the point. "You've been selected. You'll receive instructions shortly." Okay, that was fast, but the weirdness didn't stop there. Not long after, a package arrived at my door, and I mean arrived. No delivery truck, no mailman, nothing. I had just gotten up to grab a snack from the kitchen, and when I came back, there it was, sitting on the doorstep like it had materialized out of thin air. Inside was a black laptop. The thing was heavy. No brand, no stickers, no nothing. Just a plain matte black surface. There was also a set of instructions printed on cheap paper. The text was strange. Like the letters were slightly off, almost like someone had handwritten it and scanned it in, but with a typewriter font, if that makes any sense. The instructions were simple. Log into the laptop at 9 p.m. sharp. Do not close the laptop during the observation. Document everything you see. Never attempt to communicate. I was starting to get some serious chills, but I was too deep into it now. I had the laptop, the offer, and I was desperate for that money. So, like an idiot, I decided I'd go through with it. What was the worst that could happen? That first night, I booted up the laptop at exactly 9 p.m. like they asked. The screen was just black for a few seconds, and then a single window popped up. It was a live video feed, grainy and in black and white, but definitely live. It showed what looked like a small room, almost like a cell. The walls were concrete, and the only light came from a flickering bulb in the ceiling. In the center of the room was a table and a chair, and someone, or something, was sitting in the chair. It wasn't a person, or at least not like any person I've ever seen. Its head was too large for its body, and its eyes were wide and black, like oversized marbles. Its skin looked pale, almost translucent, and its limbs were long and thin, too long for its torso. It was just sitting there, staring straight ahead, completely motionless. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was I looking at? It looked like something out of a low-budget alien movie. But this wasn't CGI. This was real. Or at least, it felt real. For the next hour, nothing happened. The thing didn't move. The only sound was the faint hum of the laptop's fan and the occasional static from the video feed. I documented everything like they asked. No movement. Subject appears to be breathing, but not much else. My notes felt stupid, but what else could I do? When 10 p.m. hit, the feed cut off abruptly, and the laptop powered down. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what I had just witnessed. I didn't sleep much that night, tossing and turning, wondering if I had somehow stumbled into something way over my head. But $5,000 was $5,000, and the next morning, the money was already in my account. I told myself I'd do it again the next night. 1 week of this, and I'd be set. I could quit after that. Simple, right? That was before the messages started. The next night, I sat at my desk, staring at the black laptop again, anxiety crawling up my spine. I wasn't sure what I'd been expecting when I signed up for this gig, but it definitely wasn't that thing in the chair. It bothered me all day. Something about the way it sat there, so still, but so aware. I kept telling myself it was probably some weird experimental animal, or maybe even a really elaborate hoax. Either way, I was in too deep to back out now. 9 p.m. hit, and the laptop booted up like clockwork. The same black and white feed popped up on the screen, showing the same room, the same table, and the same creature. Just like the night before, it was sitting there, unmoving, eyes fixed straight ahead. I leaned in closer to the screen. The room looked exactly the same, except for one small difference. This time, there was something on the table. A small object. I squinted at the grainy video feed, trying to make it out. It looked like a piece of paper, folded neatly in half, just sitting there in front of the creature. Was it there before? I couldn't remember. I jotted it down in my notes. Paper on table. Subject unmoving. For the next half hour, I sat there, waiting for something to happen. And just like the night before, nothing did. Until 9:32 p.m. That's when it moved. Slowly, its long bony fingers reached forward and unfolded the paper. My breath caught in my throat as I watched, every nerve in my body on edge. The creature's movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, like it was acting out a routine. Then, it lifted its head and looked directly into the camera. I swear to you, in that moment, I felt something cold wash over me. It wasn't just looking at the camera, it was looking at me. It knew I was watching. I don't know how to explain it, but that's the only way I can describe it. Its eyes, those massive black orbs, were locked on the screen, and I felt exposed, like it could see straight through the monitor, straight into my room. My hand was trembling as I wrote my notes. Subject moved, now staring at camera, unfolded paper. I glanced back at the screen, and the creature was still staring, unblinking. Its face was expressionless, but something about its eyes. They weren't just empty, they were searching. Then, the paper it had unfolded began to change. Slowly, words appeared, as if they were being written in real time, but there was no one there to write them. It said, Hello. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. This wasn't part of the deal. I was supposed to observe, not interact. And yet, there it was, a message for me. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I close the laptop? Should I keep watching? My brain was screaming at me to turn it off and walk away, but something kept me glued to my chair. Against every instinct, I stayed. I kept watching. The paper shifted again, the letters rearranging themselves like a digital display. Can you see me? I felt a chill run down my spine. The creature was still staring at the camera, its long fingers tapping the paper as the letters continued to form. Are you there? I didn't know what to do. My first thought was to shut the laptop, but then I remembered the instructions. Never attempt to communicate. I wasn't communicating, right? I was just observing. That's all I had to do. But then the words changed again. Help me! My stomach dropped. What the hell was this? Was this some kind of sick joke? I looked around my room as if I expected someone to be watching me, but it was just me and the glowing screen. The creature's eyes were still locked on the camera, and I could swear they were narrowing, like it was trying to gauge my reaction. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the video feed cut off. The screen went black, and the laptop powered down on its own. I was left sitting in silence, staring at my reflection in the blank screen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, replaying the scene over and over in my head. Those words. Help me. What did it mean? Why was it asking for help? More importantly, how the hell was it communicating like that? The next morning, I checked my bank account again, and sure enough, there was another $5,000 deposit. But this time, the money didn't bring me any comfort. Something was seriously wrong with this job, and the more I thought about it, the more I started to question if I should even continue. But then, as if on cue, I got another email. This one was different from the first. It wasn't from the strange username. It had no sender address at all, like it just appeared out of nowhere in my inbox. It only had one sentence. Do not attempt to leave. My stomach twisted in knots as I read the words over and over again. I felt trapped. There was no way to reply to the email, no way to trace where it came from. It was a dead end, just like this job was starting to feel. Still, I told myself I could handle it. One more night, just one more, and I'd be done. I'd walk away with $15,000, no questions asked. I could forget about all of this, but deep down, I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. That thing in the room wasn't going to let me go that easily. That night, the real nightmare began. When the third night came around, I was already dreading it. I kept trying to psych myself out, telling myself it was just one more night, one more hour of watching this thing sit in that room. Easy money, right? But in the back of my mind, that last message kept playing on repeat. Do not attempt to leave. I didn't tell anyone what was going on. Not my friends, not my family, not even some random stranger on the internet. Something about the whole situation made me feel like if I talked, something worse would happen. Maybe it was the paranoia from all the deep web stories I'd heard, or maybe it was the fact that I felt like I was being watched. It wasn't just when the laptop was open either. Throughout the day, I started feeling eyes on me, like something or someone was following my every move. Every time I left the house, I'd catch glimpses of shadows in the corner of my vision, only for them to vanish when I turned my head. Even at home, I started hearing these faint, static-like noises at random, like a soft buzzing in the walls. So, yeah, I wasn't exactly in the best mental state when I booted up the laptop that third night. Same deal as always. The screen flickered to life at 9 p.m. sharp, and there was the room again. The creature, as usual, was sitting perfectly still in the chair. Only this time, there was something different. There was a sound, a faint hum, almost like feedback from an old speaker. At first, I thought it was just background noise from the video feed, but it grew louder the longer I watched. And then the creature, it moved again, but this time it wasn't just unfolding a piece of paper. No, this time it slowly stood up. Its long, thin limbs moved awkwardly, like it hadn't stood in ages, but its eyes, they were locked on the camera, like it knew exactly what it was doing. My heart was pounding in my chest. I could barely breathe as I watched. The hum grew louder, almost unbearable, like it was filling the room around me. It felt like it was vibrating through the walls, through the laptop, straight into my skull. I wanted to shut the thing down so badly, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, glued to the screen. The creature stepped closer to the camera, its thin legs moving in that same slow, deliberate way, its massive eyes never leaving mine. Then it did something I'll never forget. It opened its mouth. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe teeth or some weird alien sound, but what came out was worse. It wasn't a scream or a roar. It was voices, dozens of voices, all overlapping, like a twisted chorus of people talking all at once. Men, women, children, they all came spilling out of that thing's mouth, like it was mimicking them, like it was trying to speak through them. But the words were garbled, fragmented, like snippets of conversation that didn't make sense. Help. Me. They're watching. You can't. Escape. The voices were all wrong too, distorted, like they were being run through an old radio on its last breath. I couldn't take it. I slammed my hands over my ears, trying to block it out, but the sound was still there, drilling into my head, rattling my brain. The laptop was shaking on the desk now, the hum growing louder and louder until I thought my eardrums were going to burst. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound cut off. Silence filled the room. The only thing I could hear was my own ragged breathing. The creature was back in its chair, motionless, staring at the camera like nothing had happened. But I knew something had changed. I felt it. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm down, my fingers hovering over the laptop's keyboard. But before I could process what I'd just seen, the screen flickered again. A message appeared. "Why won't you help me?" I stared at the words, my stomach churning. My hands were shaking as I typed out my notes. Subject stood, emitted multiple voices. Message appeared. "Why won't you help me?" I didn't know why I was still writing anything down at this point. This wasn't some normal observation gig anymore. This was something else. The words on the screen flickered again, the letters shifting, rearranging. "I know you can see me." My blood ran cold. That feeling of being watched. It was like it had been dialed up to 11. I glanced around my room again, but of course, I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. Then, the creature's hand slowly moved again. It reached for the paper on the table, but this time, instead of writing on it, the paper crumpled up in its fist. It squeezed the paper tight, its fingers bending in unnatural ways, almost like it was angry. Suddenly my phone buzzed on the desk. I jumped out of my chair, my heart nearly stopping. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and saw a new notification. Unknown number. I opened it. It was a single message. "Don't look away. I dropped my phone, my heart slamming against my ribs. This was real. Someone or something was watching me, and they knew exactly what I was doing. I forced myself to look back at the screen. The creature hadn't moved. It was still sitting there, but now it looked different. Its eyes were narrowing, just like the previous night, but this time there was something else behind them. Recognition. The screen flickered again, and this time the message was different. I'm coming. I nearly slammed the laptop shut. My entire body was shaking. My mind was screaming at me to stop, to throw the laptop out the window, to run. But I didn't. Something about the whole situation kept me in place. The screen went black. The laptop powered down on its own, just like before. But this time, it felt final, like something was finished. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in my apartment, every gust of wind outside felt like it was right behind me. My phone buzzed again a few times, but I couldn't bring myself to look at it. I already knew what it was. More messages, more warnings. The next morning, I checked my bank account. Another $5,000. I should have been relieved, right? But that money didn't feel real anymore. None of this felt real, but it was. And whatever was on the other side of that screen wasn't done with me yet. I tried to convince myself I could walk away. I could just stop logging in. But then I remembered the email. Do not attempt to leave. This wasn't over, and I had no idea what was coming next. I spent the next day in a haze. Every little sound made me jump. My phone buzzing, a car horn outside, even the fridge humming. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that the creature, or whatever it was, had somehow crossed over from that creepy video feed and into my real life. I kept telling myself that I was being paranoid, that it was just the stress getting to me. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. That last message, I'm coming, wasn't a bluff. The worst part, I had no idea what that even meant. Was it coming for me? Was it trying to leave that room? Or had it already left? By mid-afternoon, I couldn't take the suffocating silence of my apartment anymore, so I went for a walk, hoping some fresh air would clear my head. It didn't help. As I walked through the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see those same dark, reflective eyes from the video feed staring back at me. But there was nothing. Just normal people, going about their day. I tried to blend in, to distract myself by walking faster, looking at my phone, anything to feel normal again. But then I noticed something. No matter where I went, whether I turned down an alley or crossed the street, there was a figure behind me. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. Cities are crowded, right? People follow the same routes all the time. But this person, they stayed behind me, always keeping the same distance, never speeding up, never slowing down. I sped up, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure stayed with me. I crossed the street again, this time without looking. I didn't care about the cars. I just needed to lose whoever or whatever was tailing me. But when I glanced over my shoulder again, the figure was gone. Relief washed over me for a second, but it didn't last. The familiar nauseating feeling of being watched crept back, stronger than ever. I rushed home, practically slamming the door behind me. My apartment felt like a prison now. Every shadow, every corner, seemed to pulse with that same dark energy from the laptop. The air was thick with something I couldn't name, and even though I hadn't opened the laptop since the night before, I knew it was waiting for me. I tried to distract myself. Netflix, music, even video games, but nothing worked. My mind kept drifting back to that message, those black eyes, the way the creature had looked into the camera, like it was looking through me. By 8:30 p.m., I had given up on trying to avoid it. I knew I was going to log back in. It wasn't like I had a choice anymore. The job had its hooks in me, and something told me that if I didn't show up, whatever was out there would come to me instead. At exactly 9 p.m., I opened the laptop again. The screen flickered to life, just as it had every night before. But this time, there was no room, no chair, no creature. The video feed was black. I stared at the screen, waiting for something to appear. A message, a flicker of movement, anything. But there was nothing. The silence was deafening. I almost felt a sense of relief. Maybe it was over. Maybe I had finally seen the end of whatever this nightmare was. But then, the black screen flickered. For a split second, I saw my own apartment, my living room, on the feed. I jerked back from the screen, my heart hammering in my chest. No way that was real. It had to be a glitch or some trick of the light. But then it flickered again, longer this time. It was definitely my living room. The video feed was showing my apartment in real time. I stood up, knocking my chair over in the process, and ran to the window. I looked outside, expecting to see a van with cameras or some kind of surveillance setup, but the street was empty. Everything looked normal, but I knew it wasn't. Someone or something was inside my apartment, watching me. I grabbed my phone and started dialing the police, but before I could hit call, a message popped up on the screen. I don't know how. It wasn't a text. It wasn't an app. It just appeared. Do not call for help. I am already here. The phone slipped out of my hand and hit the floor. I felt sick, like the walls were closing in on me. My brain couldn't keep up with what was happening. How the hell was this thing in my apartment? I looked around, frantically checking every corner, every shadow, but there was nothing visible anyway. The screen flickered again, and this time I saw something else, something I hadn't noticed before. In the corner of the video feed, barely visible, was a dark figure. It wasn't moving, just standing there in the shadows of my living room, watching. I turned around slowly, my pulse thundering in my ears. The air in the apartment felt heavier now, colder, like something had changed, like I wasn't alone. The lights flickered, and then I saw it. In the corner of the room, exactly where it had been in the video feed, was a figure. Tall, thin, with skin so pale, it looked like it had never seen the sun. Its eyes were wide and black, just like I remembered from the first night on the laptop. It was the creature, but this time, it wasn't on a screen. It was in my apartment. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was stand there, frozen in place, as the thing slowly turned its head toward me. Those eyes, they weren't just looking at me. They were looking through me. The creature's mouth began to open again, just like before. But this time, I didn't hear voices. I heard something else. A low, guttural sound, like the growl of some wild animal. The lights flickered again, and in the brief darkness, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, getting closer. I backed away, my body shaking uncontrollably, but the thing kept coming. Step by step, it was getting closer, and all I could do was retreat into the hallway, my mind racing, trying to figure out how to escape. And then, as if sensing my panic, the creature stopped. It stood there, staring at me, its mouth still slightly open, like it was waiting for something. The lights flickered one last time, and when they came back on, it was gone. Just gone. No trace of it. No sign it had ever been there. But I knew better. It wasn't gone. It was still here. I don't know how long I stood there, waiting for it to return, but eventually I collapsed onto the floor, exhausted, terrified, and completely lost. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. And now I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do. I've turned off the laptop, but I can still feel it. That thing, whatever it is, it's not done with me. I don't think it ever will be. The night after the creature appeared in my apartment, everything felt wrong. It's hard to explain, but my surroundings seemed different. Even though I hadn't touched the laptop since the encounter, I could feel its presence everywhere. It was like my apartment wasn't just mine anymore, like the walls had absorbed that thing's energy. Its eyes were always there, just out of sight. I tried to go about my day like normal, but there was no going back to normal. I barely ate. I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I'd see the creature standing over my bed, waiting for me. But it never came, at least not while I was awake. The next morning, I decided to leave. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and headed to the door. But the second my hand touched the doorknob, my phone buzzed. I didn't want to look at it, but curiosity got the better of me. Another message, from that same unknown source. You can't run. I dropped my keys. My first instinct was to throw my phone across the room, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever this thing was, it didn't need my phone or my laptop. It was everywhere now, watching, waiting, like some twisted predator toying with its prey. And somehow, I knew it wouldn't let me leave. Not yet. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I felt trapped, cornered, like a mouse stuck in a maze with no way out. For a brief moment, I thought about calling someone, anyone, but I already knew it was pointless. Whoever or whatever was behind this, they had made it clear there would be no help, not from the outside. I was on my own. That night, I tried something different. Instead of waiting for the laptop to power up on its own at 9 p.m., I opened it early. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe some kind of warning, maybe a way to break whatever hold this thing had over me. But when the screen flickered on, it wasn't a live feed. It was just black. No sound, no movement. Just an empty void. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my reflection faintly visible on the screen. The hum that had once filled the room was gone, replaced by an oppressive, suffocating silence. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of what to do. Maybe it was gone. Maybe whatever this was had finally left me alone. And then the screen blinked, and a single sentence appeared, chilling me to the bone. Come closer. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't want to obey. Every part of my body screamed at me to slam the laptop shut, to run, to fight, whatever this thing was. But something deeper, primal, drew me in. Against my better judgment, I leaned forward, staring into the blackness. At first, nothing happened. Just silence. But then, slowly, shapes began to emerge from the darkness. The video feed returned, but it wasn't the room I'd been watching before. It wasn't some far-off cell with that creature sitting passively in the chair. No, this time, it was my room. The camera was inside my apartment. I could see my own reflection on the screen, staring back at me, as if the lens was positioned right behind me, watching. My heart pounded in my chest as I whipped around, expecting to see someone standing there. But there was nothing, just the same empty space, the same familiar walls. I turned back to the screen, and my reflection was still there, but something was different. In the background, just barely visible behind me, I could see a shape. At first, it was faint, like a trick of the light, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. The creature. It was standing just outside of the camera's view, lurking in the shadows, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. My heart raced as I realized what I was seeing wasn't just a recording. It wasn't just some video playing out on the screen. It was live. It was happening right now. I jumped up, knocking the laptop off the desk in my panic. It hit the floor with a loud thud, the screen cracking but still faintly glowing. My breaths came in ragged gasps as I spun around the room, my mind racing. Where was it? Was it in here with me? I checked every corner, every shadow, but there was no sign of it, just the same suffocating silence. But I could feel it. I could feel its presence, like a pressure in the air, like it was just waiting for the right moment to show itself again. My eyes darted to the door, but I already knew I wasn't getting out. Not like this. Then, from the floor, the laptop began to hum again, louder this time. The screen flickered, the crack distorting the image slightly, but it was still clear enough to see. The camera feed was zooming in closer, focusing on the shadow where the creature had been standing. But now it was moving, slowly, deliberately. The shadow seemed to stretch, twisting unnaturally until it filled the screen. And then the words appeared again, but this time they weren't typed. They were spoken. "You are mine." The voice was deep, distorted, like multiple people speaking at once, their tones overlapping in a haunting, otherworldly harmony. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the wall, my legs barely able to support me. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on my chest, making it impossible to breathe. Then the lights flickered again, just like they had before. Only this time, when the lights came back on, the creature wasn't in the shadows. It was standing right in front of me. I froze. Its eyes locked onto mine, wide and black, endless pools of darkness that seemed to pull me in. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but stare back at it. And then, slowly, its mouth opened. But instead of words, all I heard was the same distorted hum, that awful static-like noise that had haunted me since the first night. And then, everything went dark. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor, the laptop still beside me, the screen black. The room was eerily quiet, too quiet. I don't know how long I'd been out, minutes, hours, maybe even longer. But when I finally got up, everything was still. I checked the laptop. It was dead. No power, no screen. Whatever was controlling it had finally gone, leaving me in the aftermath of whatever the hell this had been. But even as I write this now, I can still feel it. That presence, that sense that something is just out of sight, waiting. I haven't logged onto the deep web since, and I never will again. Whatever that job was, whatever they were trying to make me watch, it wasn't just observation. It wasn't just some strange experiment. It was something more, something I still can't explain. I wish I could say it's over, but I don't think it ever will be. That creature, it's not bound to a screen. It's not stuck in some far-off room. It's out there, somewhere, and it's waiting, watching, just like it always has been. I found a dark web video of an alien autopsy. The being opened its eyes midway through. Okay, before I get into this, let me start by saying that I'm not proud of what I did. We've all heard the warnings, right? Stay away from the dark web. It's not worth it. And I believe that, for the most part. I'm not some weirdo looking to buy illegal substances or dive into the underbelly of the internet. But something about the mystery of it always tugged at the back of my mind. You know, like that itch you just can't scratch. It started a couple of weeks ago when I was on a Reddit thread about strange conspiracy theories. You know the type. Aliens, government cover-ups, missing people, all the good stuff. One comment mentioned something about real alien autopsy footage floating around on the dark web. I've heard rumors like that before, but this one stood out. The comment had been removed, but not before someone replied with a link to an Onion site. And yeah, that's when my curiosity got the better of me. I had Tor installed already. Don't ask why, just had it. But I'd never actually used it for anything sketchy. Mostly just browsing weird forums and stuff. Anyway, I clicked the link. The website was super basic, no design or anything, just a white background with black text. It looked like something straight out of 1998. The homepage was nothing but a series of links, each leading to some strange video or document. One of the links was titled Autopsy, Subject 03. Simple, right? But it gave me chills. I hesitated. I really thought about not clicking it. But you know how it is. When you're deep in something, it's hard to pull yourself out. I clicked it. The video started playing immediately. No download, no buffering. The screen was dark at first, just some muffled voices, like the camera was being set up or something. And then it faded into this cold, dimly lit room. There was a metal table in the center with something on it. At first, it looked like a human body, but the more I watched, the less human it seemed. Its skin was gray, almost metallic, and its limbs were way too long and thin. The head was huge, like cartoonishly large. It was just lying there, completely still, its eyes closed. The people in the video were wearing masks and gloves, dressed like scientists, but there was no talking, no instructions, nothing. Just this eerie silence, except for the faint sound of medical instruments clinking. I kept thinking this was just some elaborate hoax, like a prank video someone made to mess with curious idiots like me. But then they started cutting, and that's when I realized it wasn't a hoax. Not even close. The camera zoomed in on the creature's abdomen as they made the first incision. There was no blood, but this strange, oily substance oozed out, almost like mercury. It dripped down the sides of the table in thick, slow streams. I swear I felt my stomach flip. One of the people, scientists, doctors, I don't even know what to call them, reached in and pulled something out. Something that looked like a cluster of dark, slimy organs. It was hard to make out exactly what it was, but it definitely wasn't human anatomy. At this point, I was glued to the screen. I didn't want to keep watching, but I couldn't look away. I kept telling myself it was fake, that I was just watching some really well-made special effects. That's when I noticed something strange. The creature's chest was rising and falling, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but it was breathing. My heart started racing. This thing wasn't dead. I leaned in closer, my nose practically touching the screen. Maybe it was some weird reaction in the body, like a muscle spasm after death or something. But no, the breathing got more pronounced, and I could see its fingers twitching. The people in the video didn't seem to notice. They were too focused on their work, removing organs, slicing into tissue. And then it happened. The thing's eyes shot open. I'm not exaggerating. They just snapped open, like it had been jolted awake. The eyes were solid black, glossy, and terrifyingly empty, but there was a flicker of something behind them, something aware. The video didn't cut away, didn't end. It just kept going, and that's when the real nightmare started. So, yeah, the thing opened its eyes, and I know how crazy that sounds. I wouldn't have believed it myself if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. But here's the thing. It wasn't just that the creature opened its eyes. It looked directly at the camera, like straight into the lens. No hesitation, no grogginess, like someone waking up from anesthesia. It was alert, and it knew it was being watched. I froze. I mean, what do you even do when something like that happens? My brain started doing these mental gymnastics, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was part of the video, a planned jump scare or something, but it didn't feel right. The way it moved was too deliberate, too real. The two figures in the video, still oblivious to the fact that their subject had woken up, continued working. One of them grabbed what looked like some kind of tool, a long metal probe, and inserted it into the creature's chest cavity. The moment the probe made contact, the thing's whole body convulsed. Its limbs, those long, unnaturally thin arms and legs, jerked violently, and its eyes, God, its eyes rolled back in its head for a split second before focusing on the camera again. But this time, they weren't just blank, black voids. There was something deeper in those eyes now, something angry. Suddenly, the video glitched for a second, the screen breaking up into static. But when it came back, the camera angle had changed slightly, zooming in closer to the creature's face. Its mouth was open now, but no sound came out. It was just staring. I swear it felt like it was looking directly at me, not just at the camera, but through the screen, through the internet, through everything, right at me, sitting there in my room. The two doctors, or scientists, or whatever, started to back away, like they finally realized something was wrong. One of them reached for something off camera, maybe a scalpel or some tool, but the creature's arm shot up, faster than I thought possible, and grabbed the guy's wrist. It was still lying flat on the table, but its hand wrapped around the guy's arm like a vice, and I could see the muscles in its fingers flex, even though they looked thin and fragile. And then the screen went black again. I thought the video was over, but a low, mechanical hum started vibrating through my speakers, and the screen flickered back on. This time, the creature was sitting up on the table. The two people in the room were gone. No bodies, no blood, nothing. Just the creature, sitting there, breathing heavily, its chest rising and falling in that same slow, methodical way. But now, it was free. I could see more details now. Its skin wasn't smooth like I initially thought. It was almost textured, like a thin layer of scales. There were dark patches on its shoulders and down its back, like bruises or burns. Its head tilted slightly to the side, and the way it did, that felt disturbingly human. I know. This sounds like something out of a bad sci-fi movie, but trust me, I was living this. The creature blinked, those black, soulless eyes reflecting the harsh, fluorescent light above the table. It was like it was processing something, thinking. That's when the sound started. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't anything I could describe as human or even animal. It was this low, guttural rumble, almost like a growl, but layered, like there were multiple voices under the surface. It was as if the creature was trying to speak, trying to force something out. The more it growled, the louder it got, until the sound became so intense, I had to turn my volume down. Then it just stopped. Dead silence. The camera zoomed in again, so close that I could see every crease in its skin, every ridge and groove in its skeletal structure. Its lips moved, just a little, like it was trying to form words, and for the first time, I noticed its mouth wasn't quite right. The teeth, or what I thought were teeth, were long, needle-thin, and translucent, almost like glass. They weren't set in rows either. They were scattered randomly across the inside of its mouth. Just looking at them made my skin crawl. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until the creature's lips stopped moving, and then, just for a second, it locked eyes with the camera again. The screen cut to black. I sat there, staring at my blank monitor, wondering what the hell I had just watched. My heart was racing, my hands shaking. I was about to close out the video, chalk it up to some bizarre deep web hoax, when a message appeared on the screen. Just a single line of text, typed in the same black font on a white background as the rest of the website. "It's watching you." I stared at the words, my brain struggling to make sense of them. Before I could react, my computer screen glitched again, this time violently, flashing between static and the darkened screen. My heart dropped when I realized the static wasn't just the screen. It was coming from inside my room. The speakers on my desk emitted a soft, rhythmic tapping sound, like footsteps. Then I heard it. Something shifted in the corner of my room, right behind me. I didn't move. I couldn't. The sound of those footsteps, or whatever that tapping noise was, froze me completely. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like my whole chest was vibrating. The room, which had been perfectly normal just minutes earlier, felt different now, like the air had gotten heavier, thicker, almost suffocating. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, but underneath that, I swear there was something else. Breathing. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the computer screen, that message still burning into my brain. "It's watching you." But I knew one thing. Whatever was behind me wasn't just some weird glitch or my imagination playing tricks on me. I could feel it, the kind of feeling where every hair on your body stands up and your instincts scream at you to run, but your legs are locked in place. The soft tapping stopped. I listened, holding my breath, praying that maybe, just maybe, I'd imagined it. Maybe I was so freaked out by the video that I was hearing things that weren't there. But then, something shifted again. This time, it was louder, more distinct, like someone dragging their hand slowly across the wall behind me. The worst part, I hadn't turned off the video. The website was still up, and the black screen flickered like it was trying to load something else. I could hear a faint buzz from my speakers, like static trying to form into words. It wasn't loud, but it was there, building slowly, like whatever was coming wasn't done with me yet. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to look. I turned my head slowly, my muscles tense and stiff, as if my body was fighting against the idea of seeing what was behind me. When I finally glanced over my shoulder, there was nothing, just the shadowy corner of my room, the same one that had always been there. But something about the darkness seemed deeper than usual, like it was stretching further back, way further than the actual dimensions of the room. I know how crazy that sounds, but it felt like the shadows were watching me back. I exhaled a shaky breath, relieved, but not convinced I was out of danger. The silence in the room was deafening now, like the whole world had paused, holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I turned back to my computer screen, deciding that I was done with the video, done with the dark web, done with all of this. But my mouse wouldn't move. No matter how hard I tried, the cursor stayed locked in place, as if frozen. The screen flickered again, and the low hum from the speakers intensified. And then, out of nowhere, the video started playing again. Only this time, the room on the screen was empty. The metal table was still there, the tools and equipment all in place, but the creature, gone, completely gone. I stared at the screen, confused, my mind racing. It had been there, right? I wasn't imagining that. I'd seen it sitting up, its eyes locked onto the camera. But now, it was just missing. The camera in the video zoomed in on the table, showing nothing but the stained metal surface where the creature had been lying. The thick, oily substance it had bled earlier was still there, glistening under the harsh light. But aside from that, the room was empty. The two scientists were gone too, without a trace. And then the camera panned. Slowly, it began to move, turning toward the far end of the room, toward a large steel door I hadn't noticed before. The door was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness visible through the crack. The static in my speakers grew louder, more aggressive, and that's when I realized whatever had been in that room was no longer on the table. It had left. My eyes stayed glued to the screen, and I watched, half in horror, half in morbid curiosity, as the camera zoomed in on the dark gap of the door. The blackness inside was thick, impenetrable, like the shadows I'd felt in my room. I had this sick feeling in my gut, like I was seeing something I shouldn't, like I was witnessing the beginning of something terrible. And then, through the static, I heard it again, those footsteps, not in the video, in my room. They were closer now, much closer. I shot up from my chair, finally breaking free from whatever trance I had been in. My skin prickled with cold sweat as I backed up toward the wall, my eyes darting from the screen to the darkened corners of my room. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out, to run, but I couldn't tear myself away from the feeling that something was in here with me. I grabbed my phone from the desk, my fingers trembling so hard I could barely unlock the screen. I was ready to call someone, anyone, just to hear a voice that wasn't that horrible static. But as soon as I unlocked my phone, it froze too. The screen glitched, the pixels distorting into an image that shouldn't have been there. It was the creature, its face, that gray, lifeless face, with those black eyes, staring back at me from the phone screen. It was the same expression it had made before, when it was watching the camera, but now it felt personal, like it was singling me out, like it knew exactly where I was, like it had been there all along. I threw the phone onto the bed, panic surging through me. I had to get out of there. Whatever was happening, it was escalating, and I wasn't about to sit around and wait to find out what came next. My hand reached for the door, but before I could twist the handle, the lights in my room flickered, then went out completely. I was alone in the dark. The footsteps returned, but this time, they weren't just tapping softly. They were heavy, deliberate, coming closer. I didn't dare move. The air around me felt charged, thick with something I couldn't explain. The shadows felt alive, like they were crawling along the walls, reaching for me. And then, in the pitch-black silence of my room, I heard something new. A voice. It whispered, low and guttural, like 1,000 layered voices speaking in unison. It didn't sound human, and it was right behind me. I couldn't move. I stood there, pressed against my bedroom door, trapped between the walls, and that creeping darkness that seemed to pulse and shift around me. The whisper, it was so close that I could almost feel the breath on the back of my neck, even though I knew whatever was making that sound couldn't be human. It wasn't speaking any language I recognized, just this low, garbled hum, like a broken radio stuck between frequencies. I strained my ears, trying to make sense of it, but every time I thought I could catch a word, the sound shifted again, slipping out of reach like it was toying with me. It wasn't the kind of noise you could ignore either. It was deep, invasive, crawling under my skin and making my bones vibrate with this horrible primal fear. And the worst part? It was getting louder. I don't know how long I stood there, trying to gather the courage to move. My brain kept firing off panicked thoughts, all of them competing for attention. Leave the room, find the light switch, check the door. But my body just wouldn't listen. The fear had me locked in place, like it had taken control of my muscles, paralyzing me with the terror of what might happen if I made the wrong move. Then I heard it, that sound, not the whispering. No, this was different. It was the same low hum I'd heard from the video, that deep, vibrating static that had filled the room earlier. But now it wasn't coming from the speakers. It was coming from behind me, from the dark space I couldn't bring myself to look at. My heart pounded in my ears as I slowly twisted my head around, just enough to glance over my shoulder. At first, I saw nothing, just the same black void of my unlit room. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized something was there. The shadows were moving, slowly, methodically, like a thick, oily mass slithering across the floor, the walls, and the ceiling. And then, in the farthest corner, something shifted. A figure. I could barely make it out at first, but the more I stared, the clearer it became. It wasn't like the creature in the video. Not exactly. This thing was taller, thinner, its body elongated and twisted in ways that didn't seem possible. Its arms hung unnaturally long, almost brushing the floor, and its face. Oh God, its face. It was wrong. All wrong. The eyes were too big, too dark, like they were reflecting no light at all. Just empty, soulless pits. Its mouth hung open in a gaping, jagged line, and I could see those same needle-like teeth from the video, glistening in the faint light from the street lamp outside my window. The creature didn't move at first. It just stood there, half hidden in the dark, its head tilted slightly to one side, like it was studying me. And then, without warning, it twitched, a sudden jerking movement that made my whole body tense. I backed up against the door, my hand fumbling for the knob. I needed to get out. Now whatever this thing was, it wasn't waiting any longer. I could feel its presence pushing against me, filling the room with that horrible static sound. The whispering had grown louder now, turning into a low, growling hum that seemed to echo off the walls. And then the creature took a step forward. It wasn't fast, but it didn't need to be. Each step it took was deliberate, almost mechanical, its movements jerky and unnatural, like it wasn't used to walking. But it was getting closer. I could feel the air getting colder, the room tightening around me, as if the shadows themselves were closing in, pushing me toward this thing. My hand finally found the door handle. I twisted it desperately, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. I was trapped in here, with this thing, and no amount of pulling or yanking on that handle was going to change that. Panic surged through me. My mind was racing, trying to think of something, anything, that would get me out of this nightmare. I heard the creature take another step. Closer. In a blind panic, I stumbled toward my desk, knocking over my chair as I went. The desk lamp was my only hope now, the only source of light in the room. My hand shot out, slapping the switch, but the bulb didn't flicker on. Nothing. The power was out. But then something strange happened. The screen of my computer, long since frozen on that black void, flickered back to life. The video had returned, but it was different now. The room on the screen was no longer empty. The creature was there, standing in the same spot. It was in my room, its black, lifeless eyes staring straight into the camera. Only now, the camera seemed to be moving, slowly panning across the room, toward the door, the very door I was standing next to. And then, without any warning, the creature in the video moved, fast. It sprinted toward the screen with this inhuman speed, its limbs flailing in jerky, unnatural motions, and before I could react, it slammed into the camera. The screen went black. That's when I felt it. Cold fingers wrapping around my wrist. I jerked back instinctively, nearly tripping over myself as I scrambled away from the desk. But it wasn't enough. That cold, skeletal hand, its hand, gripped me tighter, pulling me closer. My skin prickled with an icy burn, like the thing's touch was seeping into my bones. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. All I could do was stare, wide-eyed, as the creature loomed over me, its mouth opening wider, revealing rows upon rows of those sickening, needle-like teeth. And then the whispering returned, louder than ever, filling my head with its horrible, garbled sounds. I couldn't understand it, but it didn't matter. I knew what it was trying to say. I could feel it. This thing didn't just want to hurt me. It wanted to take me. The creature leaned in closer, its breath cold against my skin. The static in the room reached a fever pitch, and I swore I could feel the walls closing in, the air getting tighter, heavier, as if it was suffocating me slowly. And then, just as the creature's face was inches from mine, the whispering stopped. The static cut out. The room fell into complete and utter silence. It was gone. I don't know how long I stood there, my body shaking uncontrollably, my mind unable to process what had just happened. When I finally dared to look around, the room was empty. The creature, the thing that had been right in front of me, had disappeared, leaving nothing but an icy chill in the air. The screen on my computer blinked, the words "connection lost" flickering in and out as the browser tried to refresh itself. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, my skin cold and clammy. My heart was still racing, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold my phone. I don't know where the creature went, but I could feel it. It wasn't over, not yet. I sat on the floor for what felt like hours, staring at my computer screen. That stupid blinking message, "connection lost," felt like a cruel joke, like the thing mocking me from wherever it had gone. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what just happened. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that I was losing my grip on reality. But the cold, lingering chill on my wrist, where the creature had touched me, was all too real. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of the house, out of that room. Whatever I had seen, whatever had touched me, wasn't gone for good. I could still feel it, like an invisible weight pressing down on my chest. It was waiting. My legs were weak, but I forced myself to stand. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to move, to do something, but my head was swimming with fear and confusion. I fumbled for the door again, my fingers barely able to grip the handle. This time, it opened without resistance, like it had never been locked in the first place. I stepped into the hallway, and everything was eerily quiet. Too quiet. My house is never this silent, not with the old pipes creaking and the occasional hum of electronics in the background, but now it felt like I was stepping into a void. Even my own footsteps felt muffled, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I made it to the living room, my mind still racing. The lights were still out, but enough moonlight seeped through the windows to give me a vague outline of the room. I reached for my phone again, praying it was just a normal phone now, without that grotesque face staring back at me. The screen lit up, and I felt a tiny surge of relief. No glitches, no images, just my lock screen. But then it buzzed in my hand. A new notification popped up, and the relief I felt evaporated in an instant. It was an email from the same Onion site I had found the video on. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct I had told me to delete it, to throw the phone across the room and never look at it again. But the subject line made my skin crawl. You're next. My fingers hovered over the screen, frozen in place. Against my better judgment, I clicked on the email. There was no message, just a link to another video. I could have deleted it. I could have just shut my phone off, pretended I hadn't seen it. But curiosity has a way of digging into you, pulling you toward things you know you shouldn't touch. My mind was a mess of fear and adrenaline, and before I knew what I was doing, I tapped the link. The browser loaded slowly, painfully slow, but when the page finally opened, it was just like before. Plain white background, black text, and the title of the video, Autopsy, subject 04. I almost dropped the phone. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Subject 4. Was this the same thing? Was there another creature? Or no? No, I realized with growing horror. I was subject 04. I stood there, frozen, the weight of that realization settling in. My breath came in shallow, shaky gasps. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped, not just by the video, but by something much bigger. I felt it now. This thing, whatever it was coming for me. The message wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. Suddenly, the video started playing. I hadn't even touched the screen. The first image was of a dark room, much like the one in the original Autopsy video. But this time, there were no scientists, no tools, just a single metal table in the middle of the room. The camera zoomed in, and that's when I saw it. It was me. I was lying on the table, unconscious or worse, motionless, my face pale and lifeless. My chest wasn't moving. My eyes were closed, but there was no mistaking it. It was me, lying there, like some kind of twisted premonition of what was about to happen. I dropped the phone. I couldn't watch anymore. Whatever this was, it was beyond anything I could comprehend. This wasn't just some creepy dark web prank. It was real. It was happening, and I was next in line. But it wasn't over. The low hum from the speakers returned, filling the room around me. That same awful static, that same vibrating sound that seemed to burrow into my skull. I backed away from the phone, my heart hammering in my chest. The air around me grew cold, impossibly cold, and I knew what was coming. I could feel it. The thing was here. I turned toward the hallway, and there it was, standing in the doorway. The same grotesque, twisted figure from before, its eyes locked onto mine. But this time, it wasn't just watching. It was moving, its long, thin arms reaching out, those needle-like teeth glinting in the faint light. The whispering had returned, louder than ever, filling my head with those same garbled alien words. I stumbled back, crashing into the couch, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I was trapped, cornered, and the thing was closing in. Its shadow seemed to stretch across the floor, swallowing everything in its path. The static grew louder, more intense, like it was building to something. My vision blurred, my head spinning from the noise. The creature was inches away now, its cold skeletal hand reaching out for me again. And then, just as it was about to touch me, everything went silent. The static stopped, the whispers faded, and the creature, it was gone, just like that, as if it had never been there. I sat there for a long time, gasping for breath, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I glanced down at the floor, where my phone lay, the screen still on. The email was still open, but the video had stopped, and in its place was a single, final message. We're always watching. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see it. The creature, standing in the corner, waiting for me. I knew it wasn't gone. It had never really left. It was still watching, still waiting. And I know, somehow, I know that it's only a matter of time before it comes back. Because I wasn't the only one who watched that video. Now, so have you.